When it came to designing our dungeons, my first thought was a labyrinth. I love the idea of getting lost in an infinite maze of repeating corridors and rooms filled with dangerous enemies. And since we're planning for our first boss to be an insect queen, why not go for a hedge maze, like you might find in a royal garden? There's just one problem, and to illustrate, let's create a small maze segment and build it in Minecraft. Since Minecraft is first person, going through this maze is, at least perspective-wise, a lot like real life. You get stuck in dead ends, lost down branching paths, and have to map the maze in your head to escape. But now if we create the same maze segment in our own game, our perspective shifts top down, and you can spot dead ends instantly. The exact same maze that was an interesting puzzle in first person is mindless when viewed from above. Sure, we could try hiding dead ends by limiting the player's vision to a small circle, or just making the maze so big that it doesn't even matter. But good dungeons are more than just puzzles. They need enemies too, and the real problem is our lack of space for combat. The long corridors and narrow gaps between walls that make it feel like a maze also makes combat feel janky, which could be fun as a gimmick, but not so much as a whole dungeon. Our last ditch attempt was to open up the maze to make space for some actual combat, which you might have seen in previous videos and was good enough for a while, but I think we can do better. If we look at the dungeons from the Binding of Isaac, you'll see how each wall is either a dead end or a door that leads to another room. Instead of a literal maze, it's just a series of rooms that feel maze-like. If we go back to our maze segment from before, we can split each section into separate squares, with each square representing a room. Lines represent dead ends, while openings represent doors. Now, just like in first person, the player can't see dead ends until they reach them, forcing them to create a mental map of the space in their head. There's this book, literally just called Maze, where each page represents a different room of a maze, and you progress by choosing between different doors marked by a page number. A bit like those classic choose your own adventure books. In order to pick the right door, you have to follow the riddle of each room. These are often incredibly vague and open-ended, but they also have a deep sense of mystery to them. In a similar way, I want our dungeons to be filled more with riddles and abstract puzzles, rather than switches and levers, so with each consecutive visit, you're not just improving with better items and weapons, but also with your knowledge and memory of the dungeon's layout and puzzles. But first, we've got to actually make it. We ditched the hedges and just went for a castle, which still fits the Insect Queen theme, but feels much more like a dungeon. The castle walls form each room of the dungeon, patrolled by beetle guards that can jump down and lunge at the player with their spears, as well as some familiar faces we featured in our enemies video. Each brick is a hexagon, like a beehive, constructed by builderbugs who climb through holes in the wall, inspired by the way termites use saliva to build their mounds. But now we've got a new problem. Imagine a room of the dungeon that has 4 doors, like this block in our maze from earlier. Our current perspective obscures this. There should be 4 doors here, but only one is directly visible, making it hard to tell which walls have doors and which are just dead ends. There's 3 ways we can mitigate this. First, we could add a path leading to each door. No path means no door. Or instead, we could just make each opening a gate that reaches all the way up the castle wall. That way you can at least see the top of each opening. Or we could just ditch the door altogether and create a gap in the wall when there's an opening. But there's a super secret 4th solution, and that's just to change our art style altogether. If we look at the classic Zelda games, you'll notice how each wall is stylized in a way that allows you to see each door clearly, regardless of which wall it's on. So I converted our castle walls to a more Zelda-like perspective, while still trying to keep the same aesthetic. I had to ditch the hexagons just because it was too hard to draw them in perspective correctly, and I'm not an artist. But already you can see the improvement in clarity. It's also at this point that I realized we just have Zelda dungeons now, so we can go back to our first episode and add Zelda to our pot of inspirations. So far, I've shown a lot of different dungeon versions, so I wanted to ask you guys which you prefer. For now, I like the look and clarity of the Zelda-styled walls, but it might clash with the existing style we've done in other parts of the game. We'll of course add more to our dungeons in the future, with more room shapes and varieties, puzzles, enemies, and of course other dungeons. So if that sounds interesting, consider subscribing for more content. And a special thanks to Tunote for composing the song you just heard. Thanks for watching.